I'm going to destroy everything I've built in this game, leaving only this power production complex and this symbolic ironworks facility. So this messy copper factory, this iron things production building, the small glass factory, the old coal power plant, the electrical component factory, the first transport bridge and the water supply plant are all going to disappear. So all the hard work I've put in and the progress that I made gets deleted. These factories were impossible to upgrade and scale, so it is much easier for me to rip everything out and rebuild it completely. And don't worry, before I nuked everything out of existence, I moved the resources to a new location on top of the power production complex. So let's say goodbye to all this mess and say hello to the new possibilities. And now, without wasting any time, I gotta jump on this, and the first thing that I'm gonna need is a base or a platform that is easy to work with, is big enough to fit all the machinery, and can handle all the logistic stuff. So less talking and more building. Now, one thing I can only hope for is that I didn't underestimate the amount of space I'm gonna need for this project. So fingers crossed that this is enough and we can move on to the next stage, which is bringing all the resources from the surrounding area to the base of the mushroom, where they're gonna get sucked up the shaft to stage 1 production and logistics, which is just a fancy way of saying I'm gonna build a bunch of smelters and foundries. I know this is easier said than done because I've always struggled with making these things look at least half decent. So instead of trying to make it look good, I'm going to go for something purely functional with platforms and ramps. I'm sure it's still gonna look decent enough and will still stand out from the environment. And let's be honest, there's no need to overcomplicate things, at least not yet. So now if I connect all these belts to the conveyor lifts and all of these belts to the belts over on the other side, we have our final resource intake, which is basically just a bunch of conveyor lifts, conveyor elevators that are floating about in mid-air. So perhaps I'm gonna have to cover it up just a little bit so it doesn't look as horrendous as it does right now, but at this stage I would consider this resource intake to be pretty much finished, and I want to move on to the next step, which is stage 1 production, to turn all of these raw resources into usable materials. A quick update, I actually did spend a little bit of time trying to cover this horrendous thing up with some glass and pillars and half walls and whatnot, and I think it does look a little bit better, not entirely great, but I'm gonna have to be happy with it. And I also added these weird looking pillar supports for all the beltwork, so nothing's really floating anymore. I also did forget to build whatever was supposed to be inside here, and I also did that, which I think looks kind of great. I love the glass theme, so I can look through walls and ceilings and see how the resources are moving. And now I can actually move on to doing some production. Now I do have close to 2000 raw iron coming into this building, and the smelting process is going to take quite a bit of space, but I'm pretty sure I did not underestimate how much space everything is going to take, at least inside this middle kind of sandwich layer in here. So first I'm just gonna need to add tips to these conveyor holes and set them to the proper height so I can extract the resources and direct them in the respective smelters and foundries. I've also made some blueprints for this step in particular, but unfortunately I cannot double stack them one on top of the other because, you know, there's some clearance issues, but I think that's still gonna be pretty handy and I'm going to utilize them a lot. And just so we have a sense of how much production I'm going to actually have to do, we have 1920 of iron coming in, and this module can process 240 of it at 100% clock speeds. So if we divide that, we're gonna need 8 of these modules just for iron alone. Then I'm gonna need 4 more for copper, 4 more for Kytherium, and then quartz and limestone are a little bit different and I don't yet have blueprints for those. So I'm probably gonna go and make them when the time comes, so I don't have to hand build everything, which is super tedious. I actually think that the blueprints update did spoil us a little bit, because we used to have to hand build everything multiple times across all the factories, and blueprints are just such a huge time saver. And by the way, you can download every single blueprint that I use in this build. Just hop onto our Discord and there's a neat little channel in the Satisfactory category called Blueprints where you can grab every single one of them. So I have good news and bad news. The good news is that the thing fits. The bad news is, however, I've built them slightly misaligned. If you take a look here, this is way out of line. And another piece of bad news is that this is the wrong side. I wanted to have the outputs going towards the middle in between the sets of machines, but unfortunately I forgot to rotate the ones on that end, and I'm going to have to manually dismantle every single one of the components in every single one of these clusters on the outside. So this one, this one, this one, and that one over there in the distance. That's gonna be a little bit painful, but I'm gonna have to do it because I don't want to have misaligned machines. And obviously I don't want them to be facing the wrong way, which is going to be making managing the outputs that much harder. Honestly, I can't wait for the next update where the devs are gonna add the feature where we can actually dismantle the entire blueprint with one selection. No, that took a little bit of tinkering, but I can proudly say I managed to achieve alignment. So now every module has been disassembled and reassembled in the right place and in the right orientation. So I can start working on getting power here and then connecting all of the belts with the resources into the correct inputs on the machines, and then routing all of the outputs into maybe some small storage area, perhaps here in the middle somewhere. And this is it. All of the machines are hooked up to power and all of the outputs are also hooked up to a couple of storage containers that are going to act as a sort of a buffer. And nothing's running quite yet, but that's just because I haven't flipped the switch yet. So I did hook up the power, and if we take a look here, yes, indeed the power is hooked up because we have a demand and we have a supply. And as soon as I flip the switch, we're gonna have iron ingot production. Or don't, because I have not set any recipes yet. And I have set the recipe for a couple of them already, but they don't seem to be working. Okay, it didn't take a lot of tinkering at all, because apparently, if we take here, this is a splitter, this is also a splitter, but this and the entire outside section of every single array are covered in mergers rather than splitters. So I'm gonna have to go ahead and manually remove every single piece and then try and replace them. And I'm also gonna go and upgrade the blueprints that I've made to have the correct parts in the correct places. Okay, so now all the smelter arrays are upgraded. I've also fixed the blueprints and I have fully working production line for iron ingots. So now I'm gonna do the same thing for copper, then I'm gonna move on to steel, and then I'll see how much space do I have left for the rest of the stuff. So I've put down all the machines and hooked up all the power to them, but before I work on bringing all the resources to the copper smelting array and the foundry where we're going to be making steel using a solid steel ingot alternate recipe to produce 50% more steel ingots. I overlooked the fact that I have two distinct outputs, one of which is 240 steel ingots per minute and the other one is 120. So I'm gonna have to do some weird shenanigans with belts and merging the outputs. And I'm not quite sure how I'm gonna do that just yet, but the basic premise is that I have 4 modules that are gonna be producing 360 steel ingots. So what I'm thinking is I'm gonna run a 240 belt, this one, and merge them to a full Mark IV belt. And then I'm gonna use 120 ingot outputs of all 4 arrays to also merge into one fully saturated Mark IV belt. This way I'm gonna have 3 separate lines at the end here for a total of 960 steel ingots. Another small tiny thing that I noticed is that I forgot to create a small localized storage buffer for copper ingots and steel ingots, so perhaps I'm just gonna plop it down here and don't worry about it before I actually need the resources up above the sandwich layer. So let's get to belting and resource managing, and I hope this doesn't take long because I can't wait until this simple section is over and I can move on to actually building some cool stuff up above. I'm gonna be honest, the belt work is questionable to say the least in some places. I mean, I even have a little bit of clipping going on in places like these, but in my eyes this looks kind of futuristic, so I'm assuming it's gonna be okay. I really like these neat, tightly placed belts, for which I utilized conveyor wall mounts, which I don't do too often because, you know, of the spacing issues. It does add one extra kind of bump to a side, so the alignment is a little bit tricky because I'm not really used to that, but I'm overall very pleased with the result. So now the moment of truth. Let's maybe start by turning these things on and then going to see whether or not they work or not. And right from the get-go, I see that the entire thing is buzzing and moving except for the copper. Does it have something to do with conveyors? No, it doesn't. Are these smart splitters? No worries, it's an easy fix, and as long as it's the only thing that's wrong with this thing, I'm super happy. So let me just fix that and we'll move on to limestone and quartz and the kitty room stuff. I'm gonna be completely honest with you, it got a little bit hectic towards the end with all the belt work in this tight little area, so I had to resort to, let's call them unconventional solutions to the situation, so I could neatly pack and handle all of the belt work, whether it's inputs or outputs. Also managed to grab plastic and rubber from the power complex, so we have that sorted as well. And on that note, I think that all the work in the sandwich layer, aka logistics layer, aka stage 1 production area, is finished. Now all that's left is to try and neatly guide all of the outputs from all of the machinery to the respective outputs, so I can push the resources further up the shaft and onto the main production layer above. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you did, or dislike if you didn't. And as always, this has been Aprox. Thank you for your eyeballs, and I'll see you in the next one.